In the latest episode of Barnaby's podcast, Eye of the Beholder, we talk about the diamond trade at auction, a sparkling category that has attracted new markets and new money, but also new technology. Meet Tim Goodman, the fisherman and previous auctioneer who believes in transparency, who wants to challenge the diamond industry, and who once told Mark Zuckerberg that his nude policies are bullshit. Welcome to the episode Diamonds Are Forever. Tim, I thought I've been a long time in the business when counting my more than 25 years in the industry, but you have far more experience than that. How did it all start?
When I left school, Pontus, I didn't know what I was going to do. My father knew the chairman of an Australian auction house and he arranged for me to meet him. And within a few days, I had become a cadet auctioneer, as it was called in those days. And my first job was to clean the lavatories, which was wasn't exactly my idea, but nevertheless, they were the cleanest lavatories I think they'd had for some time. And then I ended up owning a whole bunch of Australian auction houses in three separate states, including Sotheby's Australia, Bonhams and Goodman, which was a brand that I launched with Bonhams in London, and several old 19th century auction houses that had been established by Australians, and I acquired them from their great-grandchildren and grandchildren, and that was 40 years later.
And how strong is the Australian auction market, would you say?
The Australian auction market it's very different to any other market around the world. There's a lot of, as you would imagine, being a former English colony, there's a lot of things that relate to England and Europe. Also, during the late 19th century, when the English were in Southeast Asia, particularly in Hong Kong and China, after the various wars, the Boxer Rebellion, the Opium Wars, etc., when the British military officers retired, they'd got used to the tropics, and a lot of them retired in Australia with things that they'd, let's say, acquired during their service in the region. So there's some very good things in Australia. They come up regularly at auction. The Australian art market is very buoyant. There's a big following of, most recently, the market has been strong for modern and contemporary work. But in the past, colonial art was very strong. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a big demand internationally, but there's a very strong demand here in Australia.
You mentioned Sotheby's, that you were setting up Sotheby's in Australia. Sotheby's is obviously one of the most prestigious brands and auction houses in the auction world. Why did you quit?
Look, I didn't set Sotheby's up. Sotheby's was established in Australia in 1983 by Robert Bleakley, who had worked for Sotheby's in London for a decade and had become a director of their antiquities department. Interestingly, I was there also in London for a short time whilst Robert was there, also working for Sotheby's. But the company grew and became the most powerful brand in Australia. Christie's opened up some years later and competed with Sotheby's. But when I opened Bonhams and Goodman, which was Bonhams with my surname, the Christie's lost a lot of market share and they ended up closing down. So it was Bonhams and Goodman and Sotheby's, and I had worked for Sotheby's in my younger years, and Sotheby's had a very strong art business. I made an offer to Sotheby's Inc. in New York to buy the business, and they accepted. And so in 2009, I bought the company under a license agreement. And in 2011, I sold it. You asked why. Well, Pontus, I had spent over 40 years in the industry. I'd achieved everything I wanted to achieve. And it was time to enter into new parts of my life and to pass on the Sotheby's business, which was a fabulous business, to others. And I sold all my auction houses, all 5 of them, to management buyouts.
You said a traditional auction house model is unsustainable. What do you mean by that?
In 2013, 2 years after I sold the companies, I was approached by a very wealthy Australian who had a big art collection. He'd bought a new house and he was getting rid of 100 lesser pictures. He said, let's I'm not going to pay the fees that the auction houses, the traditional auction houses charge. Let's have an online auction. Please advise me on what I should do. I looked around and there was not one online auction business that was available back in those days. So we both put our heads together and said, why don't we start one? So that was the beginning of my business, Fine Art Bourse Australia Proprietary Limited. And the reason why today I think the traditional auction model is unsustainable is because the fees are so great. And with the availability of digital technology, there are so many ways of alternatively providing traditional services with a far lesser cost base. So in my view, this is my personal view, I think that Sotheby's and Christie's and Bonhams and Phillips and others will gradually move more and more upmarket. They'll concentrate more and more on the valuable things. This is already happening. But eventually they'll become sort of almost like exclusive galleries, like a cross between a retail gallery and an auction house, which is actually trending now. You'll see that Christie sold South Kensington, for example, and Phillips has radically changed its model. They are going up market. They're trying to concentrate on the most expensive things where the profits are. Meanwhile, the lesser things are being handled by lesser auctioneers. And it's my view, and already, I mean, during COVID, so many auction houses have been just doing online sales. So COVID has forced upon us the online system, yet the traditional auctioneers that are doing online auctions are still charging the same fees and commissions, which I find extraordinary. So I think there's change in the air.
Mm. And in fact, you and another iconic person from the industry, Simon de Pury, has always been in front row when it comes to having a modern approach to a very traditional auction industry. Some years ago, you were very early to start an online auction. But how was that received by the market then?
Look, Simon de Pury is an extraordinary character. I've only ever met him once, and he was ahead of his time. He was a disruptor. I talked to him about what we were doing, and he actually had a comeback about 5 years ago. Did a big sale. I think from memory it was in conjunction with Christie's, some sort of European aristocrat, their collection. But how we received 2015, we promoted our first online art auction, and sadly, Pontus, it never happened. And the reason for that was we had some serious issues with technology, and we had a number of challenges with, we got together a fabulous catalogue of pictures from all over the world, but the technology just was not working, and we abandoned it, unfortunately, and we decided to change what we were doing, and I went back to Australia, and we ended up having an online auction in Australia where I sold a painting for $2.2 million, which was the highest price ever achieved for an Australian female artist. The picture is now hanging in the Pompidou in Paris on loan. It was a painting by Emily Kane Kawari, the famous Aboriginal Australian painter. So, I mean, it worked, but there were problems.
Yeah.
We've regrouped and we've changed our business model.
But what about that painting? That was quite an astonishing figure that you got for the painting. Was that a surprise to the market?
It was such a fantastic painting, so important for so many reasons, that I think the market knew that it would go well. It sold, it's public knowledge, it sold to the Australian billionaire Andrew Forrest and his wife Nicola. They collect all sorts of art. They also operate a charitable organisation relating to the Aboriginal people and Aboriginal culture. And he, of course, is the founder and chairman of Fortescue Metals, which is one of the biggest iron ore producers in the world. The painting was well known. It was well documented. It had hung in Japan. It had hung in the National Gallery of Victoria. It was a very famous picture. So I don't think it was a big surprise. It fetched the sort of price that it should have.
Mm. Another thing in your life history is that a few years ago you were in a conflict with Facebook and Instagram. outspoken as you are, you actually wrote a letter to Mark Zuckerberg saying that the nudity policies are bullshit. What was it all about?
Well, you've done your research very well. I'd completely forgotten about that. So we had an online auction of antique erotica, and which was an extraordinary project in so many ways. It took me to strange places around the world, meeting strange collectors. We published images of naked people, not just women, but men and women, and our catalogue, as you can imagine. And anyway, Facebook had a problem and made us put little emoji on people's genitals and on women's breasts. So, sort of a beautiful figure, like a female figure, a sort of angelic female figure with a satire, with hooves and horns sort of creeping around. You get, a classical sort of image. Had little emoji on her bosoms and her vagina. So I wrote to Mark Zuckerberg and never received a reply. And my letter was simply making a fundamental complaint about their policy. But it got a lot of press. It got, which was one of the reasons why I did it, because it got us a lot of press.
Yeah.
And people found out about the auction and bid.
Mm. And we had to add, this was paintings we're talking about, not even photographs, right?
There were both, but mostly paintings, yeah. And they were, they weren't serious. They weren't pornographic. Mm. They were beautiful works of art. Some of the Indian miniatures showing, sort of fairly blatant sort of sexual activity. It's not pornography. It's highly collectible classic art. Mm. Perhaps some of the Netsky that you turn upside down and see a sort of bit of action underneath, they might have been sort of verging on pornographic, but highly collectible. Mm. But yeah, Facebook just has this attitude towards nudity, whether it's art or not. Mm. It's ridiculous.
Mm. But it made up a quite good story in the press anyway, I remember.
Yeah, indeed.
So you started the first public tender of rare Australian pink diamonds by opening a market to the private buyers when you were asked to sell a collection of rare pink diamonds. Why was a new market space needed?
Okay, well, first of all, you've got to understand the pink diamond business or market. Pink diamonds or coloured diamonds fancy coloured diamonds have become enormously popular, particularly in Asia. At every Christie's and Sotheby's auction in Hong Kong, the star lots are always coloured diamonds. They have fetched per carat some of the record prices. A Russian pink diamond, about 13 carats, I think it was, flawless. I can't remember what shape it was. It might have been cushion cut, I think. It made a fortune recently, something like 30-odd million US dollars, which per carat is it's an enormous price. So the market for coloured diamonds is huge. Now, the Argyle mine, which was established about 40 years ago in the Kimberley in West Australia, it has produced about 90% of pink diamonds that are out there in the marketplace over the last 40 years. They have spent a lot of time and money on marketing those stones. And the appetite for Argyle pinks is enormous, both here in Australia and all over the world. Some of the great dealers in New York, Hong Kong, Antwerp are holding big stocks of pink diamonds. The Argyle mine used to have two private tenders every year, just the same as like De Beers do. You have the site holders who are invited to come along, and they have to maintain sort of an acquisition level each year to be invited back, etc. People probably don't understand how that works, but that's been around for 100 years, that system, and they use the same one. So we thought, and so you've got all these people with private people, superannuation funds, investment funds, etc., who bought pink diamonds over 40 years And when they go to sell them, there's no outlet. They go to an auction house, and the auction house says, well, that'll be 12%, sir or madam. And they say, well, what's the buyer's premium? 25%, sir or madam. And then there's taxes, and then there's a photographic fee. It can be 50%. It's ridiculous. It's fundamentally flawed to sell such if it's a piece of art or a major piece of furniture, it's different. But a diamond which can be scientifically described on a piece of paper, it doesn't make sense. It's like charging 50% to sell a share on the stock market, because a share is just a piece of paper. Well, so is a diamond. Anyway, so cut a long story short, we saw an opportunity. We were asked to sell a collection of diamonds by the mortgagee in possession. Someone had a bad debt. We started promoting it, and boy, suddenly we were approached by lots of people who had diamonds to sell. So we did a tender in July. It was hugely successful. It made $8 million Australian, and we're now doing another tender, our second tender, which closes on the 6th of December.
Mm. But what about, did you had any reactions from the industry so far? Because it has been a quite traditional industry, hasn't it? With certain rules.
Look, Pontus, all my life, the industry has said I'm mad. Just about everything I've done, they've said it'll never work. He'll never be able to buy Sotheby's. He'll never be able to get Bonhams to work in Australia. Well, Bonhams in Australia was doing 50 million turnover within 3 years. Sotheby's was another success story. I put up with this all my life. When we started doing this pink diamond tent, it'll never work. Well, it does work. And we charge a buyer's premium of 12.5%, which is half what everybody else charges. And we charge the seller 10%. The trade, they get discounts as usual. But so it's a much more cost effective, but it's very focused. And we spend a lot more money on marketing than the traditional auction houses do. It's a specialist space for a specialist market with specialist goods. And it's working really well, and everybody's very happy, both buyers and sellers. And the other thing is, when you're buying a diamond for an investment, the biggest problem is, how do you liquidate it when you want to get your, the return on your investment? If somebody wants to resell a pink diamond, then they don't pay any fees at all when they resell it. It's free. And that makes it much more attractive to investors.
Does it mean that I can be a seller from Sweden but selling on your platform, or do I have to be in Australia?
No, look, anybody can sell, but it's not like eBay or others. We have to have possession of the goods. And the reason for that is that we need to do due diligence on the stone to make sure, diamonds are complex. They can be treated. In the early days, Argyle did not issue certificates. So diamonds that were bought a long time ago without any sort of certification. So we have to put them through a scientific testing process to make sure that they're from the Argyle mine. And we issue one of our associate organisations, Delta Diamond Laboratory, issues certificates of origin. So there's a due diligence process. And also we do a roadshow where we go to every capital city around Australia. We've got to photograph them and do videos. If you're bidding from overseas, you need to be able to get really good information about that diamond, not just videos and stills, but if it's a big stone and it's old, it was bought 30, 40 years ago, it might be a recutting proposition. So we need to do mapping with equipment made by a company called Sarin. So, yeah, it's quite complicated. So we have to have the goods with us.
Because otherwise the market for diamonds can be tricky, can't it? There is fakes and corruption within the market.
Well, there's corruption in every market. The art market, don't get me started on that. Your listeners might take exception, but the art market has been, look, read some of the literature, the book about the biography about Lord Devine and what used to go on sort of 1890, 1910, and all the skullduggery with Berenson and all those people. But yes, diamonds have been the subject of corruption, like everything else. But we guarantee our descriptions, we guarantee good title, and I don't do that lightly. We do that because we have the opportunity to do due diligence. The diamond industry is not transparent; it's opaque, and we're just trying to make it a little bit more transparent. And next year, by the way, we are launching an online auction trading platform for white diamonds, currently being built at the moment by our technology partners in Australia. But toward the end of next year, we will have a democratised auction trading platform that anybody can sell on and anybody can buy on. And the buyer's premium is going to be 5%.
That's a competitive advantage, obviously. So, but you also mentioned this world-famous Argyle diamond mine in Australia. But I mean, what is so special with the stones?
The answer is simply colour. The colour of these stones is superior to most, not all, but most of the material from Africa, Russia and South America. It's superior in colour. It's more pink. The pinks are more pink. There are also red diamonds, and they are absolutely magnificent. They're like the finest coloured ruby. There are blue diamonds, some fancy yellow diamonds, but not a lot. But the blues and the reds fetch the biggest money, and then the pinks can be in all different ranges. They're basically just a better colour than a lot of the diamonds found elsewhere. But they're small. They are small, and they're very rarely clean. They're usually marked. But, you know, the inclusions are not considered to be hugely important. They obviously would be better if they were clean, generally marked, which is accepted. But it's all about that colour. Stunning.
Are there any more mines in Australia?
Yes, the parent company of Argyle is a publicly listed company, and it has other diamond mining interests. There's another firm called Ellendale, which is involved in a mine that produces yellows. But Rio Tinto, which is the parent company of Argyle, now closed, it produces massive amounts of industrial material, and it's a very big producer of industrial grade diamonds. I think the biggest in the world from memory.
And why did the Argyle diamond mine close down?
So originally, it's a great story. How it was founded was some guys were out, I think, on a bushwalk, and we have in Australia these large anthills, and ants move little things around. And they saw this red sparkly thing on the top of the anthill. And they thought, that's funny, it can't be glass because they're out in the middle of nowhere. So they took the thing back and had it looked at, and it turned out to be a diamond. The word got out, and so the area was prospected, and they found the deposits of pink diamonds. And it was a pipe from previous volcanic activity. I don't understand the geology, but so the diamond mine was founded, and it was a surface mine. They were just digging up the surface and washing it and taking out the rough. And then they went. That stopped. They couldn't find any more, so they went deep, and it became increasingly expensive. And it got to the stage where it was too expensive. So in November last year, they closed the mine down, and since then they've had 2 tenders to disperse their final stones. The last tender was just recently, about 4 weeks ago, where the prices were 40% more than the previous tender earlier in the year, which was 40% more than the one late last year. So the prices have been going through the roof. They've gone up from 2010 to 2020. They went up 500%. Now, I don't know what's happened since then, but I reckon they've gone up, compounded another 100% in the last 12 months.
Just because of the knowledge that you can't get more diamonds from the mine?
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean, if I could work out what drives supply and demand, I wouldn't be here now. Obviously, I'd be on my island next to Richard Branson's, sunning myself a rich man. But supply and demand's a funny thing, particularly with art, collectibles, jewellery and diamonds. It's fickle. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. But one thing is for sure, suppliers come to an end. So what will happen to demand, I can't predict that, but I can't see any reason why it won't continue to go up.
And what happens if I take a plane to Australia, I go there with an axe in my hand? Would I be able to fetch some diamonds in the closed mine, or is that impossible today?
Well, if a Swedish gentleman coming with an axe, we would immediately assume that you were a Viking, and we'd probably be very worried. But no, I think you'd need more advice and more equipment to go and find diamonds. I think that it's a lot harder than that. Otherwise, I'd be out there doing it as well. I mean, one of the other things that we're doing this time round, and this is really, really exciting, we're the first company in Australia and the third auction house in the world to accept cryptocurrency as payment for diamonds. Christie's did it, was the first with payment for NFTs, for non-fungible tokens in the form of artworks. Sotheby's did one about 5 weeks ago with a very fine white flawless diamond, which belonged to a famous New York dealer, and it sold for a big price and was paid for with Bitcoin. So we're going to do that this time, and we think that'll be interesting.
Very much so. I also happen to know that you are a fisherman, but my information source says that he wasn't too impressed. Do you have any comment on that?
I am a fisherman. I'm a fly fisherman. I'm passionate about fly fishing. I'm just trying to think who that source would be. The source was not impressed with what? With my fly fishing, or?
Well, the size of the fishes you got.
Oh, right. Well, yes. Well, I recently went fly fishing and in New England in Australia. So named New England because it's like England. It's just beautiful country. And the only fish I photographed, my first fish, you're right, was small. And then I ran out of battery. And that's my excuse, because the next fish were much bigger, but my battery was flat and I couldn't photograph them.
You always need a good fishing story, don't you? And this is one of them.
That's my story and I'm sticking to it.
That's good. I believe you. So thank you, Tim, for being on this podcast. I wish you good luck, and it will be very interesting to follow your challenging of the diamond business, definitely.
Thank you, Pontus.
Thanks a lot, Tim.
My pleasure. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.